Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. On this episode of the show, Jason Britton, founder and CEO of Reflection Analytics, is with me for a conversation about the power advisors have to craft a portfolio that reflects their clients' values. Now, this is not going to be some crazy left or right-leaning finger-wagging session where Jason and I tell you what values you should encourage your clients to express through their investing behavior. Quite the opposite. The goal is for you as an advisor with a fiduciary duty to your client to ask the right sets of questions so that the client has a portfolio that aligns with their values and helps them accomplish their life goals in the process. Jason and I cover a lot of ground in this conversation, so if you like nerding out on history, economic principles, and the foundations of capitalism, you're absolutely going to love this episode. Now, before we get to the conversation with Jason, please make sure you take a moment to subscribe to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a topic or a guest for the show, hit me up. I'm basically at Mike Langford everywhere on the internet, or you can shoot us an email, podcast@finservmarketing.com. Okay, let's get to the conversation with Jason Britton. Well, Jason Britton, welcome to the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. So wonderful to see you this morning.
Mike, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, you know what? You're right. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm super excited. You're excited. You know, you mentioned you're a little under the weather, but you don't look it. You look handsome. So you should be watching this on the video feed, by the way. You wanted to see like overdose of handsome guy this morning. You got two of them right here.
I was going to say, are you messing with us, Mike? Is this actually a radio broadcast?
Nope. Show exactly the face for radio is the joke, right? Anyway, I'm so thrilled to have you on the show. You and I had a vibrant prep call, and anyone who hasn't talked to Jason, you're about to get what I would call like an influx of passionate belief that we should be working with clients and helping them actualize their values through their investing process. Or maybe you'd articulate it a little bit better, but making sure that their investing reflects their values, I guess, is maybe a little better. See what I did there with the reflect?
I did. I like that.
So I think a fantastic way for us to kick things off today would be to walk through the evolution of the expectations for financial advice. And that sounds kind of like a weird thing to say, but during our prep call, you said something that really leapt out to me, and it was something along the lines of finance at some point in time pivoted from being a means to an end and became finance for finance's sake. And I was kind of like, I think you're right? Like we know we started a long time ago. It was just like, hey, what product can I sell you? And it went from there. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind unpacking that a little bit, and we'll expand from there as we go along.
Absolutely. So at the risk of being a little bit sacrilegious towards the finance community, we started off as a group of individuals who would raise funds from institutions and folks and put that money in things that were supposed to generate return, that they would take that return and do something with it, build a factory, build a house, retire. Finance has morphed into a lot like news, where it's them talking to themselves in this constant echo chamber, where we create artificial things like benchmarks and all of these different measuring tools, all of these different asset allocation schema, all the math. I mean, if you believe it or not, prior to about the 1970s, like the Greek alphabet wasn't involved in finance. It was just buy, sell, hold, and the stock price. So when we started to over-engineer it and turn it into smartest guys in the room and everybody's trying to become a trader as opposed to an investor, I think that's really when it changed.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm glad you brought up the whole alpha, beta, using Greek things. We always joke of like, oh, this is all Greek to me. Well, for a while there, financial advisors and stockbrokers were actually speaking Greek to their clients, using Greek and feeling like I'm impressing my client or my client needs me. And in part, there was true, right? The average financial consumer, the average investor, doesn't know much about finances. They don't know a lot about a stock, bond, or a mutual fund and what sets one apart from the other. So they do need a professional to lean on for insight and so forth and guidance. But I think there probably was a point in time where like, hey, you know what? Let me show you how smart we really are. We're going to use these things like alpha and beta, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of gobbledygook that you don't understand or need to understand in order to have a successful financial life.
So I would akin that to financial services, in the last 50 years has evolved pretty dramatically, right? Where it was a service that was provided to the very select few. It was
Mm,
around access. And then again, to your point, it was around sort of the academic component, right? It was the Greek, the
yeah.
the alpha, the beta, the
Yeah.
gamma, the delta. And I know I'm not doing a cheer for those of you who went to college and have those are literally all finance terms that mean something very specific. And only to people in finance. And it's really not that different than medicine, where you could make up some incredibly complicated word for what I have going on here in my, laryngitis, or you could just say, I have a slightly sore throat, right? One you can charge $150 an office visit for, and the other one, you're just going to make me a cup of tea. So I think really that's kind of what finance has morphed into.
Yeah.
There's model portfolios, there's asset allocation and diversification, there's access, there's what we do on the values based side. And that's where I really think we were going with the question, which
Yeah.
is what's different about this now? The difference now is we're not just doing finance to maximize return on a risk adjusted basis, because as it turns out, people aren't that great at understanding what their risk tolerance is.
Yeah.
And finance isn't that great at giving them the tools and the methodology to actually uncover what that risk tolerance looks like. I mean, there's an entire field of behavioral economics that Richard Thaler and folks like Bob Schiller have spent careers and won Nobel Prizes unpacking. And that's really what I'm focused on,
Yeah.
is that not what does the math or the academic answer say, but how do people actually feel? How do they respond to market environments? And then when you're talking about what it is they own, how does that play a role too, right? I mean, because there are certain things, there are certain professions, and we won't, because we'll keep this a PG radio show. There are certain professions you can do and make a whole bunch of money, right? But they're illegal. And for some reason,
Yeah.
you choose not to do that. You have a moral compass that says, this is the line that I draw. Well, other people's line is in different places. Other people say, my line is fossil fuels and climate change.
Yeah.
My line is diversity, equity, and inclusion and gender equality. My line is living wages and access to healthcare and paternal and maternal and entire family leave benefits. So it really is about helping individual clients uncover what they care about and bring the same passion and knowledge that they spend when they're looking and comparing labels in the Whole Foods grocery store on which product to buy to financial services.
I love it. I love it. This leap, if you will, or this evolution, the last time I saw something like this, it was probably 20 years or so ago when all of a sudden people started talking about goals-based investing, right? Like we're talking about the client's goals for life versus, hey, let's help you, as you mentioned, maximize risk-adjusted return, or in the case of the client's view, maximize the amount of money that you see on your statement, your quarterly statement. Like, is this more than it was the last time we talked? Is it more than it was last year and then 5 years? Like, let me grow my pie. We started talking about things like goals, like what can you do with your money? Well, I want to retire. Well, I want to send my kids to college. Let's talk about those individual goals. Oh, I want to leave a legacy when I'm gone. What does that legacy look like, right? How much do I want to leave? And what form will it take? So we started all of a sudden waking up as an industry that we're not just about accumulation and selling product. We're about helping the clients achieve the things that they want to achieve in life. But you've taken it a step further, I think. When we start talking about values, like, well, hey, I can still talk about retirement or sending my kids to college or leaving a legacy, but there's also a process in there too. Like, there's the impact I want to have in the world. There's how does this make me feel? How I'm doing this. So, I guess let's dive into that, the values a little bit more, and you just actually teed it up a little bit. How do you and the team at Reflection Analytics define what a value is in the context of investing? Because it's kind of hard. Like, I think everybody knows what. Like, when I say Jason, I have some really good family values, or I have really good values. Like, everybody kind of has a different idea of what that is in their head, I think. What do you mean when it comes to the context of investing? What are values?
So there are three things that I want to unpack with you there. The first is when you talked about goals-based investing and sort of the evolution of that. So goals-based investing is nothing more than segmenting money into different piles with different time horizons for
Yeah.
which you're trying to achieve something. So,
Yeah.
for example, I'm assuming you're going to be sending your kids to college before you're going to be retired.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're going to be paying for your wedding before you're paying for your kids' college. So it really is just about timing out cash flows and different
Yeah.
risk buckets so that you know whether or not when you run your Monte Carlo simulations and you have your confidence intervals, what are the chances that we end up being able to achieve this goal, filling this
Yeah.
bucket. And then some of your higher quality software providers have put things in place with visual representations around, we want to buy a second home, we want to take a big vacation, we want to pay for this, that, or the other thing. And
Right.
what they've done is they've created these buckets of have to have, like to have, that sort of thing. Now, values-based investing is goals-based investing, but it's real time. It doesn't have a future. It's not wait until you accumulate this wealth to accomplish the thing.
Mm.
Values-based investing is goals-based investing, but right now. What do you want to achieve? What do you care about? What's important to you? And then how do we see that manifest itself in the portfolio? So I'm saving for my children's wedding. That's my goal. I've got 18 years, I hope at least, given that my children are 8 and 3 years old, to do that.
Yeah.
But what I invest in can also matter to me in real time. And it doesn't necessarily have to support the underlying goal, but it can support whatever kind of values oriented relationship that I have to my assets or that my children have to the assets. Now, when you mentioned reflection analytics, I do want to be clear for our listeners. There are two distinct companies, right? So one is a technology company, Reflection Analytics. That is a software-based tool that allows advisors and asset owners to do some self-discovery, right? So what are the things that I care about?
Mm.
Achieve some kind of mosaic of what that looks like for them, and then apply it to either an existing portfolio you have or a sample portfolio to see how things would shake out, right? It's a tool.
Yeah.
Reflection Asset Management is an SEC registered entity. It actually creates product that would sit on the back end of that user journey. So someone comes
Okay.
to Reflection Analytics, interacts with the product, learns that what they care about on, we refer to it as SEE, stakeholder, environment, and ethos and ethics. So not ESG. ESG is it's been weaponized as a term, and
Yeah.
it generally speaking is from a corporate risk mitigation perspective, not an investor first perspective. All we care about is the investor. It's the C-suite's responsibility at the corporate level to manage their risk. It's my responsibility to help investors understand what companies are doing, saying, and actually producing, and whether or not there's values alignment there. So the tech business is the detective, if you will,
Yeah.
and the asset management business is the thing that creates direct index product for you after you're finished on the journey and you know what you're looking for.
Interesting. Interesting. I love it. So thank you for unpacking that a little bit. And I love, by the way, if you could expect to see a poll quote or one of the clips that from this episode being your articulating just how values-based investing is effectively goals-based investing, but in real time, right? That is that's one of the clearest ways I've ever heard somebody articulate it, and it really makes sense to me. So I think we're going to share it for everybody else. One of the things that really made a big impact on me during our prep call, and actually gave me a good laugh, and I think you as well, was that you shared. We were both reflecting and sharing some stories of how easily and unintentionally you can find yourself in a contentious situation when you bring up the mere notion of certain values to certain people, right? In other words, you can step in it pretty easily. And you mentioned ESG, and people get tense when they hear that phrase, that term sometimes. So, and I think it's somewhat understandable. We all understand that we're in a climate of some folks may not be open to a conversation about their values if they feel like an advisor is trying to influence their values a little too much, right? They just might not be in the headspace for that. So this is where Reflect shines, I think, and where you as a team shine, is that you focus on asking the right questions. And I think that was so important. You talked about how you ask something, how you tee up a conversation can make all the difference in not only the receptiveness of the client being willing to talk about it, but what they share, right? So I wonder if you could walk us through like how you recommend and how the technology goes about having conversations with clients about their values, and then how those values can be used as a lens to help them do the things they want to do.
So I think it's first and foremost important to acknowledge the fact that a lot of the advisors who are trying to do this kind of investing, or who are frankly avoiding it because of the concerns that you just mentioned around quote unquote stepping in it, that's likely because there's product on the shelf that they have to work with, and that product in their lens is a take it or leave it kind of situation, right? So if I've got a sustainability product or a fossil fuel free product, or I've got a product that's quote unquote progressive, that's going to be really difficult to have a conversation with my conservative or faith driven investor, because those
Sure.
things are misaligned. We start with what does the client care about, without any a priori expectation or anything we're trying to sell them. It's about discovery first. It's genuine discovery. What drives you? And the good news is, when you show up without an agenda, you're going to get a lot of really good insight into what motivates your customer. So when we ask questions, it's not, and we talked a little bit about this too on the framing the question, right? The jury question that we won't repeat, but essentially, if you ask someone whether or not they care about the environment, most people, even conservatives, hard left, faith, everyone is pretty much saying, hey, whether they recognize it's climate change or not, they're concerned about preserving the earth, right? That's just
Sure.
a general human concern. So that in and of itself is relatively benign. When you start to go down, especially things that are somewhat polarizing politically, right? You as the advisor are a fiduciary, and you have to leave your politics at the door, because what you're really trying to do for the client is uncover what they care about and put together a portfolio, or find a best fit from what's already being manufactured out there and on your investable buy list that speaks to them, not
Yeah.
to you, right? It's their money. You would
Yeah.
never sit down and try to put your particular risk profile or your risk appetite or your time horizon as an advisor on them. It's all about them. So why would you do that on the values-based side? It doesn't make any sense. So what we start with is we ask those questions that are sort of open-ended and giving the client the opportunity to speak to what it is that matters to them, and whether those issues are climate change or renewable energy or working families. It can also be strong national defense,
Sure.
right? So building a product. So we have a couple of different mutual funds and ETFs that we advise on, where other people provide us the values, we provide the securities and the intellectual horsepower to do portfolio construction on their behalf, so that the resulting portfolio doesn't detract from their ability to generate risk adjusted return. Right? So if someone came to me and said, I am a deeply conservative, deeply spiritual person of faith, I don't want to own, and they ticked off a whole list of industries: alcohol, tobacco, firearms, gaming, and pornography, but I also am interested in supporting those companies that reflect my conservative values as it relates to social media, as it relates to family values, as it relates to, we would build that for them. The same as we have built things for Democrats and progressives, the same as we have built things for people who want fossil fuel free. This is about giving the end client the opportunity to not be forced into a product that doesn't match their values. And the reason we exist is because we have that intellectual capacity, the research and the methodology to put the pieces that survive back together in a thoughtful way, so that you can end up in a place that still delivers that risk adjusted return without compromising who you are.
I, I'm so glad you brought that up, right? Because, you know, I think it's the polarization comes, I think, or the bristling comes when someone hears values. They think values is only, you've defined the values, right? Like you're saying that,
Right.
hey, if I don't buy into this philosophy of only investing in alternative energy stocks versus oil or more traditional fossil fuel energies, or if I don't buy into this philosophy of buying companies that are woke. I don't, whatever, you know what I mean? That type of stuff. That we're not talking about values. Your values are completely different from me. And they'll shut the conversation down, right? And then the same could be on the opposite, right? End of the spectrum, if you will. And by the way, this is not, we're shades of gray. We all are. You'd be surprised at how much inner conflict, if you will. Like I can say one thing and they'll be like, no, but also on this thing, you'd be surprised at how much more conservative I am on that other thing or what have you. So I love this. I love that it's not advisor driven. It's 100%, hey, the client's values. I love the fact you brought in the fiduciary notion of this, right? That we are doing what the client wants. We're helping them actualize their returns, but also actualize the values that they want in their portfolio.
So you make an excellent point there around everybody being shades of gray. And that's true on both sides of the political spectrum, right? I mean, it's incredibly difficult to walk on the fringes and be internally consistent.
Yeah.
We use a phrase inside the firm that we stole from a relatively now unpopular comedian called "of course," but maybe, right? So the idea is that, of course I'm interested in, strong family values, and I'm interested in incredibly thoughtful and focused portfolios around my faith, but I may have a homosexual child and I still love that child, right? You can hold two conflicting thoughts at the same time, right? You can be nuanced in that way. And I think that's the difference, is that finance has historically painted itself as a science, as a hard science. There's a right answer and a wrong answer. You can do the math and there's what's supposed to happen. The reality is finance is mostly a social science, right? Because the market, right? If you walked away from it and you sort of put it into the big picture context, finance, the market, companies, and securities, these are all inventions of mankind. These things do not exist in nature, right? I mean, the idea of bartering and the idea of trading with other members of your tribe, clan, species, that's there. I get that, right? But the corporate form and the SEC and all of those things, like it's not a product of either biblical or the evolution. It was created, right? Let's argue that you created. And now when you have a construct like that, where you have this artificial thing, right? The market, it's open and frankly ripe for opportunity for misinterpretation and manipulation. Yeah. So I liken it this way. So the market every day opens the opening bell at 9:30, and stocks go one of three ways, right? They go up, they go down, or they stay the same. So there are not a lot of options, not a lot of choices, not a lot of outcomes. Slightly more, 1/3 more than flipping a coin. Yeah. Now, then the next question becomes, okay, well, what did it do yesterday? And is that predictive to today? And then what did it do the day before? And you go on and you start to look for pattern recognition. And there are some things you can explain and some things you can't. What's interesting about finance, and you could liken it to two teams playing a professional sport, right? The buys versus the sells. Yeah. Now you're watching these two teams play, and on any given day, a buy or the sell team could win. But how people are feeling and where they're placing their wager on that, is the buy team going to win today or the sell team going to win today, actually influences the game, right? It would be like if you were watching DraftKings and you're putting your bet in on your phone and it actually is affecting the quality of the play during the Super Bowl, because that's what the market is. So there are certain market participants who have outsized impact. All we're saying is that's all well and good. Put it off to the side. There are a collection of people who come together to make a product or service. And that product or service is put out in the world by a company, and that company has a security, and that security is listed. Would you buy the product? Do you trust the people? If you do, then you got to ask yourself now, okay, is the company healthy? Is it well run? Where are we in the business cycle, right? Values-based investing does not replace traditional thoughtful analysis, right? Because there are wonderful corporations out there that are fantastically run, but that make horrible products that are dangerous, right? And then there are companies out there that make fantastic products that are actually great for mankind, that are ineptly run and won't be around in 6 months.
It's true.
So
I love that.
There's either way, right? You can't, which is why when you look at those sort of indices or the products that come out that are black and white, the SIN index or the etc. Those two things, that is not enough. That is not enough to build a portfolio. It is not an investable thesis. It's a necessary condition, but it's
Yeah.
not sufficient. You have to add more.
Well, and you could frankly, you could have a company that's a little bit of like, I love the fact that you brought that up. You could have a great company, great product, does a lot of great in the world. Company stinks in terms of like the financials and so forth. But you could also have a company that, hey, listen, this company is quote unquote a sin company, if you will. It runs a casino or whatever that treats its employees amazingly well. That also is like one of the greenest companies in the world. I'm thinking about some of the Vegas like gambling places, right? The casinos, like they sell gambling, right? Which for some people,
they're lead certified buildings.
Right.
They pay living wages. Philip Morris is I would say is a better example, right?
Sure.
Again, gaming, that's a particular value, and some people might agree or disagree with it.
Sure.
Fine. Philip Morris, right? At one point, female CEO. At one point, a third of the board independent and women. At one point, one of the largest philanthropic companies as a percentage of revenue in the world in terms of supporting education and the arts.
Yeah.
Like virtually every museum and or art installation in New York City has got something to do with Philip Morris or Reynolds.
Wow.
But their product, when properly used, results in death.
Right.
So how do you reconcile those things, right? Like would you own the world's nicest, most thoughtful, employee loving, human capital engaging weapons manufacturer?
Right.
But you also wouldn't go out of your way to try to buy a company that was fantastically run, incredibly thoughtful, generous to its employees, but didn't make any money, right? I mean, there's a word for that. That's called charity. That's a nonprofit, right? It doesn't turn a profit. It has a different, modus operandi. So it really is, and I not to put too fine a point on it, because I don't mean to belittle the complexity of the conversation that people are having now around ESG and what it means in Europe and all of those different things. But the reality is that you are using an artificial term to describe a fictitious movement, and then you're mincing words about its application. Who cares? Stop. Take a step back. People care about what they own. People care about the products they buy. Can you help them think of the company that they're buying a share of stock in, whether it's in their 401k or in their taxable account, as being an owner, direct or indirect, of that company? And what does that mean to them? Like if they had to go and sit in the board of directors room and make a decision about this truck or that computer or whatever it was, would they be comfortable with the information they had? Oh, it's a great, we were able to knock 12% off the margin, but we have to use child labor in Kuala Lumpur to do it. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah.
Some people may say yes, some people may say no, right? I can take the other side. So I was classically trained at Georgetown by the Jesuits, so I have been taught to argue both sides very convincingly, because that's the point. So I would argue that in some of those places where they are literally saying, international labor standards say you have to be at least 14 or 15 years old to have a job. There are some countries and there are some places where the 12-year-old is the oldest man in the house because of the last 2 generations of civil war. And if he doesn't work, his family doesn't eat. Which of those is the greater sin?
Right. Well, and someone could also ask that, hey, listen, in the United States, historically, back in the early Industrial Revolution, we had child labor, and that was the first rung, if you will, on the development of a modern nation. And that sometimes when you're developing your country, the early stages don't look so good, right? And if so, these countries are looking to grow. So taking it, going along with your opposite end of the spectrum argument, if you want to take both sides.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to that point, when you're thinking about companies and their securities and building portfolios, right? There's no such thing as perfection.
Yeah.
That's true from a management perspective. That's true from operations perspective. That's true from, like, I don't care what you're making, if it's pencils or Ferraris, every once in a while, there's going to be a defect in the product. That's just the way it works. And I don't care if you're a 5-person small family business or you're a 50,000 person publicly traded company. People are involved. Somebody's going to have an off day. Something's going to happen, right? You cannot seek perfection. But what you can look for is consistency and alignment. And if you are big believers in technology, if you are big believers in, health and safety, whatever it is, there are opportunities to have a portfolio built for you that does, at the very least, no harm
Yeah.
to the world, and that's something, right? To know that you're net zero in
Yeah.
terms of creating harm. But on the other side of it, there are companies that you can make a risk adjusted rate of return with that allow you to also feel pretty good about the
Yeah.
products and services that you're making, right? Like I own XYZ, right, company, and it's pharmaceutical, and it discovered a new drug for Alzheimer's, right? I was a part of that by supporting their
Yeah.
stock price and supporting that company and giving them access to capital in the markets. They were actually able to achieve this, right? The point of a corporation, if you go all the way back to their very first sort of appearance on the scene,
Yeah.
the point of a corporation is to create some kind of public good or service that no one person could afford to deliver on their own. So we come together and we pool our capital. If we
Yeah.
think about it that way, we can still have room for disagreement on management practices and principles, right? But it's also the same concept, and not to be so close to the election bringing this up, because I know half of the people are going to love this comment and the other half are going to find it offensive.
Okay.
The reality is that that's the very nature and system of government. That's its purpose, right? Democracy, in at least anyway, right? So if you're talking about an absolute monarchy, it's one person and it's their way, and you get it right or you die by the sword.
Right.
Democracy is we want to achieve something that's greater than any one of us can do alone. So we collectively pool, and we're going to
Yep.
disagree on the way, right? It's messy. It's not fun. It can be somewhat tense at times, but the reality is the outcome in that particular frame of reference, that particular sort of experiment, is almost always better
Yeah.
than the cult of personality of one, whether it's
Sure.
a monarchy or a plutocracy or et cetera.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I've actually heard that some similar phrasing. Like there's certain things that only government can do. Like, oh, you're right, right? Because you can't rely necessarily 100% on the individual's goodwill to do this type of thing. Or if it's like a massive public works project, great example, right? That isn't necessarily always going to get done by, corporations or the goodwill of the people. It might be something where we as a big collective have to come across and decide, yeah, we're building a massive pipeline to bring water from Northern California down into Southern California, so California can actually have water.
Right. Well, so what you're talking about there is really interesting to me too. Again, I didn't intend to make this podcast sort of this Jason Britton's philosophy hour.
No, it's interesting. It's
But
good. I like it.
When you're talking about a public good and the free market, right? Everyone's like, well, let the free market do its thing. Let the free market decide, what companies survive and don't survive. And the reality is that that's fiction.
Yeah.
Like for your listeners, and I hope this isn't. If you're driving right now, pull over to the side of the road so you don't create an accident, because there's no such thing as a truly free market. There's intervention and subsidy everywhere, and whether it's taxes or it's whatever it is, like there's no economist in the world that would look at the world and say anybody functions as a truly free market. And
Right.
You're right, when it comes to big public infrastructure projects, sometimes the many have to choose to subsidize the few.
Yeah.
And whether that's a function of just fairness or some other motivation, right? If you let the free market economy drive, you never would have seen the electrification of the West.
I was literally going to bring up the Rural Electrification Act. It's like
it would never have happened.
Yeah,
right?
you wouldn't have electricity in small town America at all, or that you could afford without
Right.
putting solar panels on your roof right now. Like there would still be parts of America that would not have electricity, would not have phone service.
Wouldn't have the internet.
Right, because it's like it is so prohibitively expensive to run wires across vast expanses of nothing and hook up 300 houses in the middle of nowhere. When you look at the scale of America, it is prohibitively expensive to pull that off without the government deciding all Americans, it's in all of our good to have electricity in that place or have telecommunications with phones back in the day in those places.
Well, so I liken that to the modern day conversation around the Inflation Reduction Act and the subsidy for renewable energy, green infrastructure, and those kinds of projects, where both sides of the aisle, frankly, have found something wrong with it in some form or
Sure.
fashion. But the reality is that, so yeah, you have to make the best decision that you can collectively, right? And the people have spoken, the people have voted, they are asking for change. That it is my president, it is my government.
Yeah.
The reality is, if you have spent over the last 100 years subsidies for oil and gas exploration and providing discounted federal or free leases to drill in federal land and those kinds of things, like the energy sector, depending on the time and the cyclicality of it, has experienced both subsidy, R&D credits in research, direct investment, and also we have a strategic petroleum reserve, right, where we've decided that for the national defense, it's good to prop up that industry,
Yeah,
and
for
we're
sure.
now a net exporter of energy. I, I have a problem with climate change, but I don't have a problem with the reality of we are currently set up to be an economy that's run on fossil fuels. I believe we need to transition. And I believe the
Sure.
only way to transition is to subsidize that transition. So to say that, oh, well, if solar and wind and hydro and the rest of it won't stand on its own, if the free market won't support it, then it should die.
Yeah.
But that's so narrow-minded, right? It's so narrow-minded in relationship to the idea that why was it okay for subsidy here, right? Why was it okay for the government to spend money to put a
Yeah.
person on the moon? What did we achieve from that? Well, at the time, we didn't know. We had no idea
Yeah.
what we were going to get out of it. We just knew collectively we wanted to do it. What we got out of it was the early days of the internet. We got out of it jet travel. We got out of it all of these other externalities, right? That turned out to be great for everyone. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you have to go on that journey, that leap of faith. You see it in pharmaceuticals and drugs all the time, right? There's R&D tax credits and there are all these different kinds of things. Like we really need, in my opinion, and this time I'm going to tie it back to values-based investing, is to just collectively take one giant breath, count to 5 and say, everything's okay,
Yeah.
right? This is regardless of your politics, right? Even if Vice President Harris had won, this is still the greatest country on earth. This is still the country that almost everyone else tries to get into. I wear that as a badge of honor, right? Immigration is an economic issue. It is a policy issue. It is a human rights issue. I believe it's an issue of faith.
Sure.
Right? I mean, again, not to get biblical, but I'm fairly certain that Christ didn't say, oh no, only be kind and charitable to those people who live in Judea, not the ones who live in
Right.
Nicaea, because they're over the border illegally. Like love of mankind is not a political thing.
Sure.
Right? Finding a way to maintain rule and law matters to me. Charity matters to me. Helping people understand how we can turn our economy into something that is reasonable and fair, but that still rewards ethics and productivity. If you come up with the next greatest idea and you want to and it makes you $100 billion, I say good for you, right? I have no issue with that whatsoever. But I do have a slight issue with you making that money at the expense of other people or at someone's harm.
Right. That's right.
Generating benefit all day long, right? Extractive, punishing, illegal, disproportionately manipulative, not okay.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. We're having a great philosophical conversation. I could go on, but this is fantastic. So many things actually. Number one, anybody who was questioning some of the things you said, I would urge them to Google energy tax credits, right? Like when I used to work at State Street back in a long time ago. And I remember looking at energy tax credits and then researching it and so forth. And it's like, yes, we offer tax credits because when a company is exploring energy, i.e. back in the old days, drilling holes in the ground, they're not making any money, but they're spending a lot of money, right? They're generating these tax credits and that becomes an asset they can sell on the market, get cash, use that cash for more stuff. So really fascinating thing. The other thing you were just talking about like having no problem with somebody becoming a billionaire. It's funny. I'm in the same camp with that because I think oftentimes people think, oh, a billionaire has like just $1 billion just sitting in cash in a bank, and they're keeping it from everybody, and that money was made by making other people poor. It's like, no, usually becoming wealthy was a function of you created value, and that value was shared by lots of people, whether you invented a new technology, whether you were the Sam Walton and created Walmart, which made affordable goods available to many, many people across America. Like, think of how many people rely on a Walmart, and yeah, that brought good. Like, so there's some bad in there too. Where everybody can make those arguments, but you usually become wealthy by creating lots of value for lots of people.
Right.
And that value is most cases based on a stock of a company. And if all of a sudden that company doesn't do well, you could lose your value. You could lose your billions really quick. And we've seen that too.
So there's a theory that came out of Harvard Business School that's essentially called the theory of shared value,
Yeah.
where it looks at corporations and it looks at citizenry and broadly lumps that together in the role of like society, and
Yeah.
says that corporations and society are not natural enemies, right? They are, to use their term, they work together in a way that citizens and society need tax base. They need
Yeah.
goods and services. They need companies to make things. They need
Yeah.
entrepreneurs to build stuff. But at the same time, companies need workforce, access to education, transportation, the rule of law, intellectual property protection. Like, both of those things can come together in a way that isn't Elon Musk has 100 billion or 200 billion or 300 billion dollars, and therefore that money was taken from someone.
Right.
No, he created that value, right? He's amassed it because of the level of success that he's been able to have in these various entities. And again, this is not an endorsement for or against Elon Musk or any of his companies.
Sure.
It's just as an explanation. There's nothing inherently wrong with generating that kind of wealth if you are creating that kind of value, especially when many of the projects that he's working on are, in my opinion, battery storage, EVs, space exploration, all things that I think are, generally speaking, good for mankind. The problem that I have with people who vilify the wealthy, because the wealthy create jobs, they pay taxes, they do all of those things, right? But I also, on the other side of that, I have a problem who vilify the working class, because working class people oftentimes are playing the hand that they're dealt. And in most other places, other than the United States, that hand doesn't have a lot of variety in it, right? There's not a lot of room to jump on the
Yeah.
social rung. And I think one of the great parts, the promise of America, is that you don't have to be the son of Elon Musk to become the next Elon Musk.
True.
You can
Very
just
true.
be someone. And that really, to bring it again back full circle around values, when you're sitting down with a family, husband, wife, G2, G3, or just sole entrepreneur, there are things that drive them. There are things that matter to them. They have a personality outside of their role in whatever job it is they do, right? So I'm a guy in finance. I have a technology company, but I'm also a human being, right?
Yeah.
I have 2 children. I have 2 dogs. I live in South Carolina. Like, there are all these things that make up this complexity that is me, this multi-celled organism. When you think about building portfolios for people, you can't turn all that off, right? You can't look and say, well, we're just going to buy. Again, this is not an argument for or against passive, but it is illustrative. Like, passive investing to someone who has a values lens is akin to going into the grocery store and buying one of everything on the shelf without regard for whatever dietary restrictions they might have, right?
Yeah.
Should it have been kosher? Are they gluten-free? Are they allergic to peanuts? Like, you have to take into consideration things about the individual, their risk tolerance, their appetite for, again, because we talk about loss aversion. Like, there are people who on paper can absorb quite a lot of risk,
Yeah.
but the emotional turmoil that puts them through watching their portfolio go up and down and swing with volatility is incredibly painful to them.
Yeah.
Right. So the math and the answer can say one thing, but the practicality and implementation requires something different, because for the most part, 25 years of experience talking here, working at 3 Fortune 100 financial institutions, almost never did a client fire the firm that I was working for or move their assets because of performance. it was because of something else. It was some kind
Sure.
of fall down around customer service, some kind of fall down around it was a violation of trust and faith,
Yeah. Yeah.
almost
100%.
always. And so what we're talking about is do the thought experiment as an advisor, even if you're early on in your career. Where do you think the market is going? Do you think people are going to care more or less about the products and services that they buy in the future? I would argue more. Do you think that as an industry, fossil fuels is going to be shrinking or growing long term? Now, I can't speak for the next 4 years, but
Sure.
long term, right? We've kind of all agreed that carbon is not the most effective and efficient way to heat and or cool this planet. So, given that information, right? Why not allow yourself to slightly alter your worldview with this new information, right?
Yeah.
At one point, everything was flat. The world was flat. You went too far in a boat, you fell off the edge. And then we figured it out. We added more
Yeah.
information and we changed our perspective. And then we said, well, our planet's the only planet in the solar system because it's all we can see. And then we added a little more information and we're like, oh, no, wait, there it is. There's the technology.
Yeah.
Like, values-based investing is not dissimilar to that. It's what can we uncover? What do we know? How do we put the pieces together? How do we make it speak to you? It's like a custom suit, right? Like
Yeah.
a custom suit made for you, but made from a material you're allergic to. Isn't that great of a value proposition?
Yeah. You know, one of the things I like about this conversation is we're talking about engaging the client more completely, if you will, right? And that's been something that advisors and large financial firms, whether it's asset managers or just, the Fidelities of the world, have been looking for a long time. The more engaged the client is, and the more engaged the advisor is with the client, the more likely that relationship is going to stay sticky and grow and expand. And having a conversation about values, right? Talking to your client about things and making this routine, right? I mean, I remember like early in my career when I was a financial advisor, one of the first clients I ever won, I sat across the kitchen table from them. And it was one of the funniest experiences of my life. Husband looks me in the eye and he goes, Mike, just want to let you know, you are a marital compromise. Right? I started laughing. He's like, listen, I didn't think we needed a financial advisor. She wanted a financial advisor. We have lots of disagreements about what to do here. And it was a real fun. I loved that client relationship, right? Because, he was Ivy League or bust for the kids. The best school, whatever it is, they've got to go to the best school. Wife was like, I don't care if they go to state school. Like, I don't want to bankrupt ourselves by having to spend all this money. It was like, and it was really fun. Like, but they had certain things where they really agreed on, right? Like in terms of the quality of their travel. The travel was really important to this family. And it was fascinating. And what we're seeing now, and I agree with you, like you talked about, like, do you think we'll see more fossil fuel, less fossil fuel, that type of stuff in the future? I would say, do you think clients are going to get more information about the companies in the world than they have now or less? And is some of that information going to need to be processed, right? Because if you look at social media as an example, and the fact that everybody carries around a smartphone with them at all times, they're hearing and seeing more information. They're going to have more questions about this type of stuff. They're going to need to have more hand-holding, more marital compromise stuff going on when they have their investment conversation. So I really, really love the path they're going down here.
Yeah, no, that's probably one of the greatest terms I've heard in the last 5 years, and I'm going to steal that, marital compromise.
Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
I like that very much. So to answer your question is, yes, I believe that we are on the path to more disclosure, not less. I believe that corporations have started to internalize the idea that measuring productivity, measuring employee satisfaction, measuring customer satisfaction, thinking about their impact as employers, not just of their employees, but what that means to those employees' families, what it means to the communities in which they operate. I think all of these questions, right, while seemingly complex and really difficult to kind of put your arms around, the reality is that corporations are a collection of people, and people are complex. And you can kind of, again, we don't want to oversimplify, but
Sure.
the reality is you can ascribe a company a personality, right?
Mm.
Is it trusted friend and neighbor? Like, if they called you in the middle of the night and they needed something, would you be there for them? Or is it like homicidal maniac? Like, if I saw them coming, I'd walk across the street to get out of their
Yeah.
path. Like, and then pretty much everything in between. And
Yeah.
that's what reflection and the Reflect platform is trying to do. It's trying to help you understand, if you feel a certain way about something, there are companies that are natural fits for that, and there are companies that are not.
Yeah.
And
Love it.
can we find the best product either commercially available today, or that we can manufacture for you, that will deliver the same expected financial return and risk and meet all of those other goals that you
Yeah.
were talking about, like saving for retirement, saving for your kids' school, paying for a wedding, big travel plans, whatever it is, leaving a giant pile of money to
Yeah.
whomever you'd like, philanthropic, charitable, but doing it again in real time with that purpose and that value system part of the decision making process.
Love it. Love it. So one last question before I let you get out of here. I know we're getting close to the end of our time together, and you've been a trooper, by the way, with the sore throat thing going on there. In finance, we always talk about the future, right? We're always thinking about the future, but I'd like to get your thoughts on some future values, with a pun intended there. I suspect there are some values, if you will, that are not fully articulated. Maybe you'll correct me if I'm wrong. That are not, maybe these values aren't fully articulated yet in the current Reflect technologies that you're able to try to tease out. And I'm thinking, right off the top of my head, I'm thinking about AI and its impact, potential harmful impact on society. We all recognize that AI has got some pretty beneficial stuff, but it's not hard, especially if you're a sci-fi guy like me. It's not very hard to imagine, and I'm not talking global cataclysm here, but to really see like, oh, this could be harmful in a big way, like displacing workers and so forth, creating some social instability as a result. How do you see the future, or try to capture the value of something like that so that the client can understand it better?
So in relatively nascent technologies that have tremendous potential to influence, right, global
Okay.
growth, it's always going to be a complicated conversation. I would also urge you, Mike, as you start to talk about AI and our potential future digital overlords, be nice, because they're going to go back and read and listen to things, and they're going to be
That's
able to
true.
search it really fast. And so just don't go ahead and put your name on anybody's watch
Yeah.
list for that reason.
Yeah.
So that's just a
There you
public
go.
service announcement for you. The reality is that AI, right, is simultaneously good and bad, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of things are, right? I would argue that you could make the same somewhat philosophical argument for fossil fuel. They are simultaneously good and bad. Bad for the environment, creating global warming, choking off the atmosphere, killing biodiversity. But for the last 150 years, electricity, air conditioning, and cars have been pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
They've been really boons of productivity. So let's not paint the whole thing with a negative brush, right? It's about the introduction of new information. So I do think that AI will generate tremendous efficiencies in a
Yeah.
lot of different industries, pattern recognition. I do think that there's a potential for it to displace certain kinds of workers,
Sure.
which I mean, obviously is alarming, but at the same time, every technological advantage has, right? There's not a
Yeah.
big major at the College of Charleston in buggy whip manufacturing anymore, because
Ah.
we moved on from the
Yeah.
technology, right?
Yeah.
So it's not to say that we won't find something new and we won't grow. The part of it that I would, when I back to said simultaneously good and bad, I don't think you have to wait for the future. I don't think you have to wait for the Skynet uprising to see the negativity of AI, because I see it every day, right? Anyone who has a child that's over the age of 3 and under the age of 40 is engaging in social media in a way that, depending on how they're using it and the kinds of things they're doing with it, can be absolutely self-destructive, right?
Sure.
The mechanisms and the algorithms of what you're being fed, your exposure to news and information, like it is horrendous. Some of the studies that you see about what's happening to children globally engaging with that. And that frankly is AI. Right.
Yeah.
So that those algorithms and serving up information and creating these echo chambers of sometimes rhetoric and hate speech. Like you don't ever really hear, and now this could be the media, this could be their fault, right, for not reporting it, but you don't hear about how someone had this interaction with a group of friends on Facebook or X or TikTok, and it was so magnificent and inspired them to be a better person, and they've all created this. No, you only hear about they bullied this girl until she committed suicide, or they did this thing that the person had to leave class, or whatever it was. It's always these awful events, right? Because whether that's a function of the news media or not, I'm not in that business, so it's a different conversation to be had. But I think we have to make sure that we're clear that AI is a tool.
Yeah.
Right. I feel the same way. And again, not to make these analogies, but they're just kind of rolling off the tongue today. But AI is a little bit like a gun, right?
Yeah.
You can use that gun to rob a liquor store, or you can use that gun in defense of your home and family.
Sure.
Right. Same weapon. Is it good or is it bad? Well, it's all about the purpose behind the use. Yeah. And I think that the reality is that you could see both of those things for AI. I mean, I don't think you'll see AI holding up any liquor stores, but if it wanted to, it could certainly drain your digital bank account and make it look like you never existed if it felt like it.
I was hoping to end on a high note here. We're going to find a good way. Anyway, listen, Jason, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show. People are going to want to follow up with you and learn more. We'll make sure we get Reflect Values, which is the web, reflectvalues.com, which is the website linked up on the show notes and so forth. Where else can people follow along and learn more about what you and the team are working on?
So other than, as you mentioned, reflectvalues.com, we're also posting thought leadership and content to Reflection AM, which is reflectionassetmanagement.com, writing periodic pieces. And then I have the privilege of knowing folks like you and getting able out here to tell the story. So I thank you for the opportunity.
This is fantastic, Jason. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for listening to and or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. Huge props to Jason Britton for coming on the show. I love how nimble he is at pulling apart the concept of expressing one's values through their portfolio and making sure that you, the advisor, help your client navigate that journey. Awesome stuff. Check out Jason and Reflection. We'll get that all linked up, as I mentioned. As I mentioned at the top of the show, please subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast platform and shoot me an email if you have any questions or suggestions for the show. That's all I have for you. Hope you're being safe and be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Financial Advisor Podcast. See ya. Bye.